The prince abandoned his son for being a bastard. Years later, he finds him begging in the streets. The garden had always been a place of sanctuary, a space between stone and sky where the air smelled of citrus and damp earth. Now it held only shadows and the lingering chill of a fading sun. Dusk wrapped the royal gardens of the Palace of Liore in veils of muted violet and blue. The marble archway that once marked a gateway to stolen happiness now loomed pale and cold beneath the weight of unsaid words. Lady Isabella Villar stood beneath it, her gloved hands clasped tightly before her. The silk of her dark green cloak rustled faintly as a breeze moved through the orange trees lining the path. Beyond the walls of the garden, the muffled sounds of a banquet carried through the stone corridors. Laughter, clinking glass, a string quartet murmuring in another world. She had come at his summons, though her heart had warned her against it. For weeks, her letters had gone unanswered, her attempts to reach him turned away by servants with polite, empty eyes. And now, suddenly, a message had arrived. Meet me where we first kissed, at dusk. Alone, alone. A cruel irony. The sound of boot heels on gravel drew her from her reverie. Prince Raphael de Montemor emerged from the shadows, a tall figure in a dark navy frock coat that caught the faint light. His cravat was knotted with the careless precision only the privileged mastered, the sapphire pin at his throat gleaming dully. But his face was weary, drawn taut by sleepless nights, and a burden he had not yet spoken aloud. They regarded each other in silence for a heartbeat that stretched too long. "Raphael," Isabella whispered, her voice steady despite the trembling of her limbs. He had always been Raphael to her, not your highness, not my lord. Her Raphael, the man who had once traced the line of her cheek with reverent fingers and promised that love would defy the world. "Isabella," he said, low and rough, "you shouldn't have come." A bitter smile ghosted her lips. "Yet you asked me to." He exhaled through his nose, shoulders rising with the breath. "I had to. I thought perhaps we could speak plainly." She swallowed against the knot in her throat. "Then let us speak plainly." Her fingers unfurled from her cloak, one hand pressed to the gentle swell beneath her bodice, barely visible beneath the folds of fabric, yet undeniable now. Her breath caught before she forced the words out. "I am carrying your child." Silence fell like a stone between them. Raphael's gaze dropped to her midsection, then lifted, gray eyes wide with something between disbelief and dawning fear. He took a half-step back, as if distance might shield him from the truth. "Isabella, you are certain?" "Yes." Her voice quivered now, but she met his gaze without flinching. "I would not lie to you, nor would I ask for what I do not deserve." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, dislodging the careful order of it. His silhouette was tense against the darkening sky. "God help me," he muttered. "Isabella, this cannot be." Her heart clenched. "It already is. You don't understand." His voice grew sharper. "My father, he suspects something already. There are whispers at court. He has pressed me to finalize an alliance with the House of Alvante. If this scandal breaks, it will ruin everything." A flicker of anger burned through her sorrow. "Your child is not a scandal. He, or she, is innocent." Raphael turned back, anguish written in every line of his face. "You think I do not know that? You think this is easy for me?" He approached, voice low but fierce. "If I acknowledge the child, if I claim you, my father will strip me of the succession." He has said as much. "And what of love?" Her breath caught again. "You spoke of love once." He looked stricken, his expression shuttered. "I was a fool." The words struck her harder than any blow. Her throat tightened painfully. "And I? What am I now? A mistake?" "Isabella." He reached for her, then stopped himself, fingers curling into a fist. "Please, for both our sakes, keep this hidden. Leave the city. I will see that you are provided for." Fury surged hot beneath her skin. "You would cast me aside with a purse of gold? No. My child will not grow up nameless, fatherless. I will not accept silence." Before he could reply, another set of footsteps approached. Raphael stiffened, eyes flickering with alarm. From the shadows emerged two men in court attire, Lord Esteves and Lord Mendonça, advisors known for their unwavering loyalty to the king. They bowed stiffly to Raphael but spared no courtesy for Isabella. "Sire," Lord Esteves said, voice clipped. "His Majesty requires your presence. There are concerns regarding your whereabouts." Raphael's jaw tensed. "Tell my father, I will return shortly." "I fear the matter brooks no delay," Mendonça added, gaze cool upon Isabella. "And given recent revelations, His Majesty insists upon immediate clarity." Raphael's face drained of color. Slowly, he turned to Isabella, voice low and desperate. "Say nothing." She lifted her chin, every inch the daughter of a chancellor despite the ruin of her family. "I will speak the truth." Within moments, they were escorted through the dim halls of the palace, Isabella's heart pounding with each step. The Grand Council chamber loomed ahead, its gilded doors already open. Within, King Dom Henrique sat upon the high-backed throne, flanked by more advisors and courtiers than necessary, a deliberate display. Isabella felt the weight of every gaze as she entered. Rosalia, waiting beyond the threshold, caught her eye with a stricken look, but dared not follow. "Prince Raphael," the king's voice rang out, cold as marble. "You are accused of improper relations with this woman, resulting in a child. What say you?" Raphael's breath hitched. He looked at Isabella, one last silent plea, but she stood resolute. "I am with child," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the chamber. "And Prince Raphael is the father." A collective murmur swept the room. The king's eyes narrowed to slits. "You dare bring shame upon this house," he spat. Raphael's fists clenched at his sides. "Father, Answer me," the king thundered. "Do you claim this child?" The pause stretched unbearably long. Isabella's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Every fiber of her being willed him to speak the truth. Raphael's shoulders sagged. His eyes, tortured, lifted to hers. "No," he said hoarsely. "I do not." The words tore through her like a blade. Gasps echoed around the chamber, but Isabella heard nothing beyond the roar of blood in her ears. Her knees nearly gave way, but pride held her upright. The king gestured sharply. "Remove her. She will not stain this court further." Two guards approached. Before they reached her, Raphael stepped aside, gaze fixed on the floor. Humiliated, shattered, Isabella allowed herself to be led away. Outside the chamber, Rosalia caught her in trembling arms. "Come, my lady," the maid whispered. "We must go." Now. Word of the scandal raced ahead of them. Within an hour, Isabella's modest quarters were stripped of protection. The few loyal servants of her late father dared not intervene. Rosalia packed swiftly, tears streaking her face. "We must leave the city tonight. They will not let you stay." "I know," Isabella said hollowly. Her voice was no longer her own. By nightfall, under a cold, relentless rain, a hired carriage awaited at the servants' gate. Royal guards stood watch, ensuring no aid reached them from sympathizers. Isabella climbed inside, soaked and shaking, Rosalia beside her. The carriage jolted forward, wheels slipping on the wet cobblestones as they fled the palace. Thunder rolled overhead. The streets blurred past in a smear of grey and gold as the lamps guttered in the wind. Isabella sat rigid, numb with grief and fury. But as they reached the outskirts of the city, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her belly. Another pain followed, stronger this time. Rosalia turned in alarm. "My lady? Something's wrong," Isabella whispered. voice taut with fear. A sudden gush of warmth told her the truth her mind fought to deny. Labor. Too soon. The coachman shouted for guidance, urging the horses faster. The road grew rough, jolting them mercilessly. Isabella doubled over as another wave of agony racked her. "Hold on," Rosalia urged, gripping her hand. "We'll find a midwife. Just hold on." But the pains came harder, closer together. Isabella's breath came in ragged gasps, her nails digging into Rosalia's arm. The carriage raced through the storm, lanterns flickering wildly. In the darkness, Isabella's cry rang out, raw, primal. Then, beneath the howl of wind and wheels, a piercing newborn wail shattered the night. The sun rose pale and sharp over the sea, casting the stone houses of Ribera in tones of grey and gold. The narrow streets of the coastal quarter still glistened with dew, their uneven cobbles worn smooth by generations of fishermen's boots and market carts. Here, beneath clotheslines strung between shuttered windows, the scent of salt and old rope clung to the air. The voices of vendors calling out the day's catch echoed from the wharf to the winding alleys. In one such alley, where the buildings leaned close enough to block most of the morning sun, stood a modest stone house, its whitewash faded by years of wind and rain. A hand-painted sign above the doorway read simply, "Lace and gowns, custom work." Within, the rhythmic whisper of needle against fabric carried through the single front room. Isabella sat by the window, its panes clouded with salt haze, her fingers moving deftly over a length of fine muslin. A half-finished gown lay draped across her lap, the delicate lace along its hem shimmering faintly in the slanting light. Her back ached from long hours bent over her work, but the steady pull of thread between her fingers gave her a kind of solace. Creation, however small, was a balm against what life had taken. 7 years had passed since the night she had fled the palace, her child delivered into the world amid rain and fear. 7 years since love had been smothered beneath a prince's silence and a king's decree. In those years, she had learned to carve a life from the stone of her loss. The lace she wove and stitched found its way into the wardrobes of merchant wives and, now and then, into the guarded closets of noble women who remembered her father's name but dared not speak it. Her gaze shifted to the worn wooden clock on the mantel. Nearly 9. The market would be stirring by now. "Tomas," she called softly, not raising her voice. A scurry of small footsteps answered from the back room. A boy of 6 appeared in the doorway, tugging a patched brown cloak over his narrow shoulders. His dark curls tumbled about his face, framing eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes still caught her unawares sometimes, so piercing, so familiar that her heart stuttered. Storm gray, like his father's. "Where are you going?" she asked, though the question was ritual by now. "To see the boats," Tomas replied with a grin. "I'll be back before midday, I promise." "Tomas." Isabella set aside her needlework, folding the muslin with careful fingers. "You know you mustn't—" "I won't go far," he said quickly, eyes wide with innocent resolve. "Just the square. Please, Mama." She sighed, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. There were days when she wanted nothing more than to keep him close, away from the dangers and cruelties that lurked beyond these walls. But he was a boy of restless spirit, and Ribera's narrow streets were his world. "Very well," she said at last, "but mind your manners, and no running off to the harbor alone." "I won't." His grin widened, and before she could rise, he darted forward to kiss her cheek. Then he was gone, cloak fluttering behind him as the door clicked shut. Isabella stared after him for a long moment, her hand pressed to her cheek. He was growing too fast. And though she shielded him from the full truth of his birth, Tomas was not blind. He sensed their fragile place in this world, the glances that followed them, the silences that thickened when his name was spoken. Shaking off her thoughts, she returned to her sewing. The hours would pass quickly, as they always did when coins ran low and orders needed finishing. The harbor bustled with rare pageantry. Ships festooned with pennants bobbed at anchor, their sails unfurled to catch the crisp autumn breeze. Musicians played on the wharf beneath striped awnings, their tunes weaving through the clamor of the crowd. Fishermen and merchants jostled alongside nobles in velvet-trimmed coats, their wives trailing silken skirts through the salt-stained streets. Among them moved Prince Raphael de Montemor, his tall frame clad in a formal navy coat and ivory waistcoat. A thin circlet of silver marked his brow, more a token of his station than the heavy crown reserved for official ceremonies. His dark hair, threaded with new strands of gray, was brushed back from his face. The eyes beneath their strong brows were sharper than they had been 7 years ago, the careless charm of youth burned away by duty and disillusionment. Widowed now these 2 years, Raphael carried the mantle of air with a weary grace. His brief marriage, a political match forged in cold necessity, had left no heir, no love, only bitter silence. He moved through the day's obligations with practiced composure, offering nods and murmured greetings where required. As the ceremony drew to a close, Raphael excused himself from the cluster of dignitaries and turned down a side street, seeking a moment's respite. The cobbled lane opened into the bustling market square, where rows of stalls spilled with goods from across the kingdom, spices, cloth, trinkets, and fish laid out on beds of crushed ice. It was then he heard it, a clear, youthful voice rising above the noise, singing a ballad his mother had once taught him. The melody, lilting and familiar, drew him like a thread through the crowd. Raphael followed the sound to a corner of the square, where a small boy stood atop a weathered crate. His clothes were threadbare, a patched cloak wrapped tight against the chill. Yet he sang with startling confidence, the purity of his voice silencing nearby chatter. And his eyes, storm gray, luminous beneath dark curls. Raphael's breath caught. The resemblance struck him like a blow. The child could have been a portrait from his own childhood. He took a step closer, heart pounding in his chest. The song ended. Coins clinked into a tin cup at the boy's feet. As he looked up to gather them, his gaze met Raphael's. For a suspended moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. Storm-gray eyes met their mirror. The boy blinked, wary now, and glanced away. Compelled by an unfamiliar pull, Raphael moved forward, reaching into his coat for a coin. He approached slowly, as one might approach a wild bird, fearing it might take flight. The boy watched him warily, but did not move. Raphael dropped a silver coin into the small palm that opened to receive it. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a strange jolt through Raphael's veins. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask the boy's name. Before he could, a sudden commotion erupted nearby. A fishmonger shouted as a cart tipped over, sending barrels rolling across the square. Vendors shouted, scrambling to gather their wares. The crowd surged, a tide of bodies pressing Raphael to one side. By the time he freed himself from the crush, the crate stood empty. The boy was gone. Raphael scanned the square, searching every face. He moved swiftly through the crowd, but there was no sign of the child. It was as though he had vanished into the stones. Frustration warred with an odd ache in Raphael's chest. The boy's eyes haunted him, stirring questions he could not yet name. Without another word, he turned and strode back toward the palace, determination hardening his stride. Night had fallen over Liore, cloaking the city in velvet shadows. In his private study, Raphael sat alone before a low-burning fire. The glow limned the edges of the room's dark wood paneling and caught the silver filigree of the decanter at his elbow. Before him lay a folded sheet of parchment, still sealed in the wax of his steward's signet. A quiet knock had delivered it not an hour past, accompanied by a single murmured phrase. "Regarding the boy, Your Highness." Raphael broke the seal with steady fingers. His eyes moved swiftly over the list within. Names, brief descriptions, possible parentage of boys matching the one he had seen. His gaze halted at the first name. Thomas Villar. Raphael had not slept. The name on the steward's report burned behind his eyes long after the candles in his study had guttered out. Thomas Villar. The surname had struck with all the force of memory's cruel blade. Villar, the name of the man who had once stood at his father's right hand. And Isabella, alive. He had imagined her lost to the winds of exile. Her fate sealed that storm-torn night when she had vanished from the palace. To find her name again, now linked to the boy whose face haunted him, unsettled everything Raphael had forced himself to forget. The next morning, before dawn had painted the sky, he summoned his most discreet attendant, a former guardsman named Duarte, trusted beyond question. No inquiries must be traced to the palace. No formal summons could yet be issued. This was a matter of the heart, not of the crown. By evening, Raphael had his answer. A stone house in Ribera. Modest, respectable in its way. The child was known in the quarter, spirited, well-mannered. His mother ran a small seamstress's shop from her front room, her clients loyal and discreet. Raphael stood now before that house. No guards, no fanfare, only a simple cloak to shield him from prying eyes. The street was quiet, the market's hum distant. His heart thundered beneath the folds of his coat. He knocked. Moments later, the door opened, and there she was. Isabella. Time had changed her, but not dimmed her beauty. If anything, the years had carved a new grace into her form, leaner, stronger, her movements sure and precise. The once gilded softness of youth had tempered into the resilience of a woman who had survived heartbreak and built a life from its ruins. Her hair, still raven dark, was braided and pinned simply at her nape. She wore a modest gown of slate-grey wool, sleeves pushed up to reveal the fine bones of her wrists. At the table behind her, a length of ivory lace lay in delicate folds beneath her slender fingers. She froze at the sight of him. The color drained from her cheeks, though her chin lifted in instinctive defense. Raphael. His name fell from her lips like a blade unsheathed. He could not move for a moment, struck anew by the clarity of her gaze. Her eyes were not soft. They were not grateful for his presence. They were cold, wary, and unyielding. "Isabella," he said softly, "I had to see you." She opened the door no further. "Why?" He swallowed, his throat tight. I saw Tomas. In the market. A boy with your eyes. And mine." Her grip on the door trembled before she caught herself. "What of it? Is he my son?" The words left him in a rush, more fragile than he had meant them to sound. For a moment, her expression wavered, pain flickering beneath the mask of composure. But when she spoke, her voice was cool as winter rain. "You lost that right, Highness. 7 years ago, in a room full of courtiers, you spoke for all the world to hear." Raphael winced as though struck. "I know what I did, and I would undo it if I could. I cannot change the past, but I can do right by you both now." Her laughter was low and bitter. "Do right? How? By plucking us from obscurity, only to parade us through your father's court? Or by casting us aside again when the wind shifts?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I would see Tomas acknowledged, protected. I would see you safe, Isabella." "You would see us caged," she said, gaze burning. "I have spent 7 years fighting for my son's dignity. I will not trade it for your guilt." A sharp silence followed. Raphael's chest tightened. "At least, let me see him again, not as a prince, as his father." She shook her head slowly. "You are too late. I will not expose him to the court's cruelty, nor to promises you cannot keep." 1,000 protests rose in him, but none found voice. He had wounded her too deeply, and no apology could mend that fracture in a single visit. Seeing the futility in her rigid stance, he inclined his head. "I will not force the matter today, but I will not walk away." She said nothing as he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. The days that followed were restless. Raphael found himself drawn to Ribera again and again. Under pretense of charity work, he arranged donations to local orphanages and funded repairs to the chapel roof. Always he moved among the streets with care, seeking no attention, yet watching. It was in the marketplace that he first spoke to Tomas. The boy was delivering a bundle of cloth to a merchant's wife when Raphael chanced upon him. Without the constraints of courtly formality, he crouched to the boy's level and offered a simple greeting. Tomas regarded him with curiosity, storm-gray eyes wide. "You're the man from the harbor," he said, voice bright. Raphael's smile was genuine. "And you are a fine singer." The boy grinned, clearly pleased. "Mama says I sing too much." "I think not enough," Raphael said. He hesitated, then extended a silver coin. "For your next song." Tomas took it with a solemn nod. "Thank you, sir." The exchange was brief, but it left Raphael shaken. The boy's warmth, his eager trust, it was a fragile treasure he feared to break. As weeks passed, their encounters grew more frequent. A chance meeting at the baker's stall, a shared moment beneath the awning as rain swept the square. Each time, Raphael spoke gently, offering small kindnesses without revealing the truth. Isabella watched these interactions from a distance. At first, her gaze was hard, defensive. But as the boy returned each time with eyes alight, her expression softened with wary confusion. One crisp morning, as Raphael stood admiring a carved ship in a toy seller's stall, Isabella approached. "You must stop this," she said quietly, her voice low and steady. He turned, searching her face. "I have no ill intent." "Intent matters little," she replied. "The court will twist this into scandal. They already watch you closely." Raphael's gaze darkened. "Let them." "Tomas is my life," she said, voice tightening. "I will not have him used. I would die before I harmed him." For a moment, the air between them was charged with unspoken words. "You loved me once," she whispered. "I never stopped," he answered hoarsely. She stepped back as though burned. "Then leave us be." Before he could reply, she vanished into the crowd, leaving Raphael standing amid the swirling market sounds. At court, whispers had begun to stir. The Duke of Serpa watched Raphael's growing absences with narrowed eyes. A man of cold ambition, Serpa had long coveted influence over the aging king, and saw Raphael's entanglement with a disgraced woman as an opportunity ripe for harvest. When the grand autumn ball arrived, the court glittered beneath chandeliers of crystal and gold. Nobles from across the realm and foreign dignitaries filled the palace's great hall. The king sat in weary splendor upon his throne, crown heavy upon his brow. Raphael attended out of duty, though his heart remained in the streets of Ribera. As the orchestra struck a waltz, the Duke of Serpa glided forward, voice raised in honeyed malice. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low. "Rumors reach even the marble halls, that our noble prince frequents the slums, consorting with a woman of fallen station and her bastard child. It would grieve us all should scandal darken this court." A murmur rippled through the gathered throng. Eyes turned toward Raphael, expectant, judgment gleaming in their depths. Raphael's gaze hardened. Without hesitation, he strode to the center of the ballroom, prepared to address the court and the king before all assembled. The air in the ballroom had thickened, all lightness gone as if the chandeliers themselves had dimmed. The music faltered. A single discordant note hung in the silence. Every eye turned toward Prince Raphael as he stood in the center of the marble floor, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering. His pulse thundered in his ears. He could hear nothing else, not the murmurs rippling through the crowd, not the rustle of silk or the faint clink of goblets set hastily down. Only the weight of the moment pressed upon him. He looked directly at his father's throne, where King Dom Henrique sat with fingers white against the gilded arms, eyes narrowed to slits of ice. Raphael's voice rang clear in the silence, each word deliberate, carved from 7 years of regret. The boy is my son." A gasp swept through the crowd. "He was conceived in love," Raphael continued, steady despite the heat creeping up the back of his neck. "Love that I wrongfully denied. Before this court, before my country, and before the woman who bore him." A few nobles exchanged glances, their faces unreadable behind court-trained masks. A lady fainted quietly into her husband's arms. The ripple of scandal was tangible. Raphael pressed on. "I will not abandon my child, nor will I turn my back upon the woman who gave him life." Murmurs rose, more urgent now. Some eyes gleamed with outrage. Yet others, Raphael noticed with a flicker of surprise, held a different light, admiration, perhaps even approval. King Dom Enrique stood, his face a mask of royal fury. His voice, when it came, was low and cold. "Prince Raphael, you will follow me, now." Raphael gave the briefest nod, refusing to betray uncertainty before the watching court. He turned on his heel and followed his father from the hall, the weight of 100 gazes burning between his shoulder blades. In the council chamber, the heavy doors thudded closed. Only father and son remained. The king paced once along the length of the chamber, then turned sharply, his robes swirling. "You would disgrace this house for a woman of fallen station? For a bastard child?" Raphael held his ground. "He is not a bastard. He is my son. And Isabella is no fallen woman. She was wronged, by me and by this court." The king's voice rose. "You will renounce them, tonight, publicly, or you will forfeit your claim to this throne." It was the threat Raphael had expected, the sword long poised over his neck. Yet now, looking back upon the years he had spent drowning in guilt, it felt strangely powerless. "I will not renounce them." His father's face darkened further. "Do you understand the cost of your defiance?" "I do." For a moment, silence hung between them like a blade. "So be it," the king hissed. "You leave me no choice." Word spread faster than wildfire through the palace. By the time Isabella heard, it was nearly midnight. She had been sewing by lamplight, her fingers too restless to still. When Rosalia burst through the door, breathless and wide-eyed, Isabella rose in alarm. "What is it?" "Raphael," the maid gasped for air. "He stood before the court, named Tomas as his son, proclaimed you both before the king." Isabella's heart stopped, then thudded so hard it seemed to echo in the tiny room. The needle slipped from her fingers, forgotten. No, he would not. Yet even as she said it, her knees grew weak with the truth she could not deny. Rosalia caught her arm. "You must go to him. Now, before it is too late." Isabella's mind raced, fear and aching hope twisting in a dizzying knot. "Fetch my cloak," she whispered. The ride to the palace was a blur, Rosalia beside her in the hired carriage. Isabella barely noticed the streets passing beyond the window, her thoughts tangled in questions too dangerous to voice. Could it be true? Could he have stood before the king? For them? At the palace gates, guards hesitated until Isabella gave her name, her voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. Word had traveled ahead of her. One guard inclined his head. "You are expected." That alone nearly undid her. In the great council chamber, the court had reconvened. Select nobles and advisers filled the gallery, the air thick with tension. The king sat upon the high-backed chair, not the throne now, but a seat of judgment. Raphael stood below, alone but unbowed. When Isabella entered, a hush fell over the room. Their eyes met across the distance. Her breath caught at the raw emotion in his gaze. Grief, hope, longing. He had aged, but so had she. They had both been forged anew by pain. At a sharp command from the king, she was led forward. "Lady Villar," the king intoned, voice dripping disdain. "You have returned to the court that cast you out." Isabella's voice was steady. "Not by my choosing." "Then hear this," the king continued. "Your presence here threatens the realm's stability. This folly must end." Before she could speak, Raphael moved forward. No. His voice rang clear. I have made my choice. I will not forsake her. I will not forsake my son. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Raphael turned to her then, before all the court, his expression open, stripped of pride or pretense. Slowly, deliberately, he extended his hand. Isabella's breath caught, the weight of 100 eyes pressed down, yet in that moment they ceased to matter. She placed her trembling hand in his. A murmur rose like a tide. Among the watching nobles, the Duke of Serpa's face remained carved from stone, fury flickering behind his cool gaze. His plans unraveled with each heartbeat. The king's voice cut through the rising noise. Enough. The hall fell silent once more. 3 days hence, the king declared, his voice hard as iron, a final council will convene. There, the fate of this union, of Prince Raphael, Lady Isabella, and the child, shall be decided. The chamber shuddered with the weight of those words. The sun rose thin and pale over Liore on the morning of the final council. The city stirred beneath a veil of silver mist, its streets quiet in the early hour. But within the palace walls, tension ran thick as mortar. Servants whispered in corners. Guards stood rigid at their posts. In the great council chamber, the king's personal guard had doubled through the night. The hall itself gleamed coldly, the tall windows admitting light without warmth. High-backed chairs flanked the king's seat, each soon to be occupied by the realm's most powerful nobles and counselors. Every surface, from the long polished table to the brass sconces lining the walls, had been scrubbed to a chill perfection, as if stern order could cleanse the air of scandal. The king arrived first, his countenance drawn, eyes shadowed by sleepless hours. He seated himself without ceremony, hands resting upon the arms of his chair. To his right sat the Duke of Serpa, composed and watchful, lips pressed into a faint line. The chamber filled slowly, advisors in somber black, ministers in robes of state, lords and ladies who had arrived early to secure places where they might best witness the spectacle. Then came Raphael. He entered alone at first, his step unhurried, expression unreadable. Yet his bearing held a quiet strength, forged in the fire of the days since his public stand. Word of his defiance had spread through Liore like wildfire. He had met it with unflinching resolve. A murmur rippled through the room as he passed. Some nobles inclined their heads in wary greeting. Others averted their gaze. The weight of expectation pressed upon him like a mantle. Yet when Raphael reached his place at the table and turned to face the assembly, his gaze was steady. A beat of silence fell. Then a side door opened. Isabella entered, her hand resting lightly on Tomas's shoulder. Rosalia followed behind them, her usual care written in every line of her face. Isabella wore a simple gown of deep blue, her dark hair swept into a graceful knot. No jewels adorned her save a small silver locket at her throat. The dignity of her bearing needed no embellishment. Tomas, in a dark velvet coat and crisp white shirt, looked every inch a prince's son, though unaware of the gravity of the moment. His storm-gray eyes darted curiously about the room, but his hand clung firmly to his mother's. The sight of them drew a fresh stir from the gathering. At a curt nod from the king, an attendant ushered them forward. Raphael stepped down from his place and crossed to them. Without hesitation, he took Tomas's free hand and folded it gently in his own. Then he looked up, at his father, at the assembled court, at the future poised on a knife's edge. The king's voice broke the silence. Prince Raphael, you stand here to answer for your choices, choices that may alter the course of this realm. Speak. Raphael drew a breath. His voice, when it came, was clear, steady, and resonant enough to carry to every corner of the chamber. I stand before you not as a prince alone, he began, but as a man who once erred, who once failed those he loved. I do not seek to deny my past. I seek to honor it, and to claim what is mine. not through blood alone, but through duty, through love, and through choice. He glanced briefly at Isabella, whose gaze met his with quiet strength. "A ruler," Raphael continued, his voice deepening, "who cannot protect those he loves is unworthy to lead. If the crown requires me to forsake my son, or the woman whose love has given him life, then I would cast it aside myself. For what is rule without honor? What is power without integrity?" A rustle of whispers stirred the gallery. The Duke of Serpa's eyes narrowed. "I have wronged Lady Isabella," Raphael said, the words weighted with truth. "I will not compound that wrong by hiding from it now. I claim her openly. I claim my son, and I stand ready to accept the consequences of that choice." He released a slow breath, then added, "But know this, if this court forces my hand to choose between love and the throne, I will choose love. Every time." A hush fell. The words hung in the air, bold and final. For a long moment the chamber remained silent. Then Lord Montalvo, a venerable noble known for his sharp judgment and rare fairness, rose from his seat. His voice, though aged, carried firm authority. "Your Majesty," Montalvo said, "I have served this realm since before your son was born. I have seen many heirs rise and fall. Never before have I heard one speak with such honor before this council. I would rather follow a man who loves and protects his family than one who casts them aside for fear of scandal." A murmur of assent followed. Another noble, Lady Quintana, stood next. "It would be a shame to punish a child for the sins of his father, or of this court," she said quietly. "Let us not repeat old wrongs." Others remained silent, but the tide had begun to shift. The king's face remained unreadable, though his knuckles whitened where they gripped the arms of his chair. Tomas, unaware of the depth of politics around him, looked up at Raphael with wide, trusting eyes. The king met that gaze, innocent, unafraid. Something flickered in his expression, a weariness deeper than anger, perhaps older than power itself. At last, with a breath that seemed torn from him, the king spoke. "The will of this council is clear," he said, voice low. "And though I do not grant my approval lightly, I will not deny the realm its chosen heir, nor visit shame upon an innocent child." He looked at Raphael with cool resignation. "You may marry Lady Isabella. The boy," his gaze flicked to Tomas, "shall be legitimized by royal decree." A wave of muted relief swept through the chamber. Raphael bowed once, deeply. "Thank you, Father." The king said nothing further. Weeks later, beneath a sky bright with sunlight and the gentle sweep of sea breeze, a small chapel stood open upon the cliffs above Liore. The sea murmured softly below, its waves gilded by the midday sun. Within the chapel, friends and trusted allies gathered in quiet celebration. The court was represented, though fewer in number and far humbler in demeanor than usual. The mood was one of solemn joy, tempered by the knowledge that this union had been hard-won. Raphael stood at the altar, clad in formal attire that bore the prince's insignia, yet none of the heavy regalia of state. He had chosen simplicity for this day, truth, not spectacle. Isabella entered on Rosalia's arm, her gown of soft ivory flowing like water. Her dark hair gleamed in an elegant braid woven with pale ribbons. When her gaze met Raphael's, the distance between them seemed to dissolve. Tomas walked between them, dressed in dark blue velvet, his small chest rising with pride. His smile shone like sunlight. The vows were spoken without hesitation. When Raphael took Isabella's hands in his own, his voice was steady. "I pledge to honor you, to stand beside you, to love you until my last breath." Her answer was a whisper woven with strength. "And I you." When their hands joined beneath the arch of flowers, when lips met and the chapel rang with soft applause, a chapter long closed was at last rewritten. In the weeks that followed, Liore adapted. Gossip remained, as it always did, but admiration grew stronger. The prince's defiance had earned respect even among former critics. Tomás, now openly recognized as his father's son, walked proudly at Raphael's side. Isabella, once whispered about in shadowed corners, now moved through the streets as a woman honored, her dignity restored. And so it was on a bright afternoon that the family walked together through the heart of the city. The market buzzed with life. Vendors called out cheerfully. Faces turned, but the gazes held warmth now, not scorn. Raphael walked with Isabella on one side and Tomás on the other, their hands linked. Together they moved through the bustling streets, not as prince and outcast, not as scandal and shame, but as a family, whole at last. As they passed beneath the sunlit arches of Liore, a voice called from the crowd, a simple greeting of respect. Raphael met Isabella's gaze and smiled. She returned it, her eyes shimmering with the light of all they had gained and all they would yet protect. Hand in hand, they walked on. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.